He observed the city taking to the skies once more, for the 12th time in fact, watching how it pulled at the threads of magic and how it sailed effortlessly along the lines of force upon its prime. Yes, without them it would surely be unable to move, he thought, ensuring that what he was seeing was correct. As it sailed overhead, he noted that other magics were merely nudging it back and forth to keep it from drifting away from the force line. So there had to be some kind of power source manipulating the magic around the vicinity and performing this task. Or perhaps one of the dragons themselves. This was something he needed to know if he were to be able to ground it, and so his envoy was sent into the fray. The high priest of Sharn, Karnefos, was tasked by his god to seek out all that he could find about the nature of the city. He was under the impression it was so that Sharn may create something similar in times to come, to be more present and active among the lands of the Prime. This would have been a good intention, and a noble pursuit, had such not been directly asked by him under the guise of Sharn. Karnefos set about dutifully tasking those of the priesthood with researching all they could and divulging everything anyone had ever known about this place. It was, indeed, a vast fount of knowledge, but many of his questions were left unanswered. So Karnefos set himself the task of seeking an audience with the dragons to finally learn more, and reached out to them via a magical calling. At first, his request seemed to be ignored, but in truth it was due to the city itself having to traverse the line of force to a nexus point, a place where force lines interwove, before they could choose a new direction, so their eventual reply was many months beyond what was expected. When the lines of force crossed favorably, the dragons guided their place of refuge toward Karnefos, and eventually to a resting place so that he could be seen. This was not entirely what he had been expecting, as a dragon coming to perhaps carry him to the destination was what he had envisioned, but not their whole people coming to talk with him and bringing their city along for the ride. Karnefos was of course in awe of it all, and could do nothing initially as the basics of what their residence was slowly sunk in, and the enormity of it all, his questions being lost among the barrage of sights and knowledge gifted. Eventually, hours after he had grown accustomed to the sight and immensity of it all, he remembered why he was actually there, and began to try and take notes. It was too much for him to record or comprehend alone, so he asked that a group of his record keepers be tasked to him, and the dragons agreed. They said they did not wish to hide their kind from the Prime, but although they filled those of Sharn's heads with volumes of truths about their Prime and how their world functioned, they did little to divulge their own secrets. Also, as they moved around the city, they took note of the strange shifting sigils of unknown design that adorned the buildings, the floors, and in some places the very air. Impossible, but there, was uttered many times from them all. They were told they were an intrinsic part of how the city functioned, but would say no more on their nature or origins. More secrets, Karnefos thought. After many months of travelling with them, and of course asking just how they made their city fly, he was finally taken to a chamber that was guarded. In fact, the only place he had seen actual guards. Although they looked draconic, he was assured they were nothing more than defensive constructs, mindless and with absolute purpose. Still, they looked very capable of performing their duties, even though seeming as statues that towered even above his guide. Within the vast chamber sat a gigantic molten ball of what they described as true prime, and through this pulsed the force line, which normally would have been invisible to one not magically inclined. But here it shone with blinding light as it was threaded through the hole that seemed to pulse and slide about the tether within. The line of force moves like a thread through our needle of prime, explained the one who had taken it upon themselves to be his guide. And the two you see flanking it, he motioned to the two large grey dragons that sat in what he assumed to be meditation, barely visible at first from the glare of the force line. They keep the needle's eye from slipping from the line. Karnefos nodded with understanding, adding, and if they did not, this place would slip from the force line and plummet. Yes, although thankfully it has never happened. But we do have very good threaders, he said, smiling to the two performing their task. And should it fall, we can fly. We would just do all we can to guide it away from those who dwell upon the surface, to ensure it did not devastate the lands and peoples below. Karnefos nodded and took in the enormity of what had just been so simply announced, letting out a long drawn-out breath, thinking of what kind of devastation such a thing could cause. That would be a terrible, terrible thing, he said slowly, clearly shaken by this, the guide nodding in concurrence. His guide assured him that it never could, as they had numerous threaders on hand at all times, and in the event of threaders not being available, they simply waited upon the ground until they had enough to perform the task with multiple backups. They really did not want this possibility of a falling city to become a reality, and so they never took to the skies without more than enough of their kind to thread their needle. So, now he knew. He knew about the draconic place of residence, their meeting spots, their council chambers. He had even seen their method for guiding the city and what it entailed, and was sure that even given centuries, Shan could never achieve such a wondrous feat. At least not on that scale, but perhaps with their aid, on a smaller one? Still, there was one place they had not shown him, and he knew of its existence in legend, that of their draconic library. The guide merely said that as Shan has its divine texts for the eyes of the priesthood only, they had theirs. So that was that. He could not see them. At first he protested, but he was hoping for at least an explanation beyond that they were akin to religious texts. The guide did, however, furnish his curiosity as they watched him pace frustratedly, and began to tell him why. The knowledge store you speak of is locked away tightly, and kept that way for good reason. You see, such began before some primes had even been formed, and some of this knowledge came from before our kind had even been birthed, as we stand now, preserved by those who came before us. We safeguard this knowledge of the past with our very identities, and carry their torch forward. As much of this knowledge is beyond the time scale of some primes, it contains things beyond comprehension to many, and hidden within it is said to be a map of all of the primes, both known and long lost, including the location of the place where we obtained our piece of the true prime. Without such, that which we have accomplished with our flying citadel would never have been a possibility. It is even said to have maps of forbidden places, of the realms of the daemons, and even ways to breach the darkened ways and hidden paths to the very source itself, among other places. In addition to this, there are also many hidden places and terrible knowledge that, should they be discovered or opened by those without true knowledge and powers to survive such, would be opening up destruction upon their own lands, and even their primes, beyond the capacity for them to even comprehend. So no, we cannot allow this knowledge, any of it, to be freely examined by anyone. Not even the majority of our own kind, no matter their prowess. These were the guide's final words on the matter, and any attempt to probe further was met with a stern stare, until the question was taken back. Still, this was nothing that was needed for what he had been sent here for. It was merely to satisfy his own curiosity. Sean would surely be pleased with all he had gleaned. He was sure of it. Yes, Sean would indeed be pleased, as would their true benefactor, who sat patiently waiting for their return.